Hey, I'm going to tell you what I think is just objectively the biggest problem Warframe has. One that transcends the gameplay or the design or silly stuff like that. Something that I'm personally experienced and that I see a lot of people also experiencing. You're going to want to hear me out because I know you personally have definitely experienced this problem. Because I know that I have. So, what's the problem? The issue has a lot to do with player retention. I'm sure you stopped playing the game for a few months to even up to a year, and everyone I know has taken some sort of time away from Warframe to go play other games. And while I think that's generally just how things tend to be, I find that for Warframe in particular, the rate of people doing that is extremely high. Players don't tend to stick around, they have a habit of playing the most recent update or event, and then leaving and waiting until the next one. The only content Warframe retains players through is the main story, and as I've proved in my Mastery Rank 0 series, if you play even a reasonable amount, you can finish the whole game in like a month, and then you're out of things to do. Sure, there's other stuff you can do, build new stuff, play with ribbons, try to increase your mastery rank, whatever, but a lot of players seem content with just beating the story and calling it a day. I think this is a huge problem for Warframe. I think there should be a good reason for players to stick around instead of completing the latest content and immediately leaving. I think it's most notably prominent in players who have already beaten everything anyway. The issue in particular with a lot of the players who have gotten far in the game is that there's no real definition of end game. Stuff like getting to Mastery Rank 0 is effectively optional, and a ton of people end up just playing the game for certain game modes like Void Cascade or Conjunction Survival, or they even just play to help other players, which is what I find myself doing too. But to be fair, I can see why there's no endgame, and it's because Warframe has an ever expanding story. You can't just put something concrete down and say, here, this is the end of everything, or at least they can't until they decide to make Warframe 2. So there needs to be some sort of dynamic gameplay implemented that's an endless challenge for the players, similarly to the modes I mentioned earlier, like the Void Cascade or Conjunction Survival. But I'll be discussing more about solutions like this in a minute. And it's not just a problem for endgame players though. Newer players who still have content to play through sometimes can't even experience the latest events or whatever is going on in the game when there's an update. What's an even worse problem is Warframe's complexity. It results in some players who haven't beaten the story or all the grinds yet that might straight up quit or give up because there's so much complicated stuff going on that it just becomes easier to not play the game than return in a few months to try again. I do know that there's a lot of recent updates Warframe has had that have improved the quality of life and gameplay for newer players to make it easier to understand, but there's still so much complexity that requires you to just have a wiki up on a second screen. Now, I'll admit, I'm not a professional person to fix the problem I'm addressing. By no means am I a game developer or a designer or whatever, but I have been playing games my whole life. As a matter of fact, I'm notoriously known for only really playing free games, and that's one of the reasons I absolutely love Warframe and Digital Extremes as a company. I think the free business model that Digital Extremes has created is super well done. I've never seen any game company even come close to comparing to it. I won't even get into the amazing transparency DE has with their monthly dev streams and the way they interact personally with all of their players, but it's just the coolest thing I think I've ever seen any company do. Compare that to any other game studio, and I'd go as far as saying DE is flat out the best company out there. Digital Extremes is an amazing company, but do you know what else is amazing? You liking, subscribing, and leaving a strongly worded commenting, writing a 5-paragraph essay explaining the real problem with Warframe. Or, a nice comment too. That'd be pretty nice. So, I want to take Warframe and compare it to a couple of other free games that I've played throughout my time that I feel like have better models that improve their player retention to see what Warframe's current player retention model looks like compared to others. The first game I'll compare it to is Fortnite. I know, stop booing me. I didn't say I liked or disliked the game, I'm just using it as a tool to measure Warframe against. The way Fortnite improves their player retention of a player base that is at least somewhat comprised of a younger audience is smart. They have to consistently iterate and adapt to be able to keep up with the dropping attention span in this world as a whole, and they do so by making huge drastic changes to their gameplay. Every 3 months or so, they implement a new season into their game where they flip everything on its head, entirely changing the theme of the game, the map, the weapons, the design, the rewards, everything. I think it's an interesting case to look at because it's an example of how a game can evolve to suit the needs of its players and keep them engaged. The next game I'm going to talk about is one that I've played for a long time, and that is Genshin Impact. Like Fortnite, it's a way different style than Warframe, but I still think there's something to potentially learn from this game in terms of player retention. The way Genshin Impact keeps their players around is by prioritizing limited time events over consistently new game additions. When you log into the game, you'll almost always be greeted by an events screen that shows the player 3 or 4 things that they have going on that you can only do within the next few weeks that you won't be able to do later. I think they have this model over creating new main story quests because it really keeps the attention of players by making them think that they have to do these distractions now, at this very second. By having these run back to back, it keeps players hooked in a cycle of playing the game. As a player, I feel like it's definitely a more questionable method of maintaining player retention, but I'll admit that it's effective. Personally, I'd rather have more of the main story content though, and see them move the game forwards. And so, when you compare these two games to Warframe, you can see that Warframe doesn't really have any of the features from these two games. Warframe primarily keeps players around by trying to implement as much story content as possible. And while I love the new main story content, the unfortunate reality is that with that alone, there's no way to keep players playing. So, what's the solution to this problem? That's a good question. On one hand, you could definitely emulate these games and try to copy their player retention models, but on the other hand, you could try something new out to keep the attention of your players. Either way, I think that something needs to happen, and that there needs to be some change. So I've got a couple of solutions that I thought of that I think could work. My first solution is one that I don't necessarily agree with implementing, but that I feel like would still be a potential fix to a lot of the game's player retention problems. And that is implementing a lot more limited time events, similarly to how Genshin Impact does. A solution like that would likely look like having more clan operations that are limited time, say a month long, where players could log in and get rewards and play a special game mode with those big rewards. Warframe does already do these occasionally, and I think they're pretty good, but as part of my solution, they'd effectively be all the time, having a new clan operation every month with very little downtime. This would increase player retention by drawing in players with limited time stuff and keeping the players engaged with fresh new content all of the time. The downside to this solution would be that it would likely take away from new story content or permanent content and replace it with stuff that would go away very quickly. It would give players a sense of having to show up to get stuff within that time frame, which can be both a positive on player retention and a negative on player outlook for the game. Now, for my second solution. In particular, I've talked with my Twitch chat about a hypothetical competitive game mode that I think would be super interesting and interactive, and it would be a great alternative to Conclave. It would be a team-based game mode, and it wouldn't necessarily have a lot of the crazy movement that the game usually offers, which I think would make the player combat more usable. My idea is to implement railjack combat, where players could board railjack in teams and fight in space against another team on a railjack. There's a lot of fun things you could add to this and a lot of details that could be elaborated on, but the basic premise would cover a competitive mode for Warframe that I think would be a really good solution for player retention. It would allow early players to have a fun niche thing to try while they're playing through the game, and it would give players who are later into the game a competitive aspect like leaderboards or a ranking system to keep interest in playing the game, as a PvP mode would be easy to upkeep while providing endless entertainment. The downsides of this idea are that it could definitely decrease the overall positivity and niceness that I've seen from the community, which I think is retained by the fact that Warframe is more of a PvE styled game. And that's all I've got to say on this topic for now. Let me know what you think of my ideas in the comments, and tell me if you think there's a better solution to the problem of player retention. Thank you for watching, and have a nice day.